Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. I've been very excited about this. I have a very special guest with me today. I have James Keady, who is a Regional Digital Director at Citibank across Asia and EMEA. And he's here today to talk to us about the keeping up with customer expectations in the financial services and banking sector. So, yeah, James has got a fantastic career. He's been for the last 15 years working across all sorts of digital media, online, retail, social, customer experience, CRM analytics, and data-driven marketing. He's been leading digital teams across consumer electronics, technology, FMCG, finance, automotive, luxury, including brands like Citi, where he is now, Samsung, McLaren, and GSK. So that's a pretty impressive CV there. James, did I miss anything out? Would you describe yourself in any other way?
No, other than clearly I'm very old.
Comes to us all, yeah.
No,
yeah.
Been around, no.
Look, well, thank you very much for joining us today. I know you're a very busy man over there in Singapore. So before we talk about maybe sort of more recent history, I saw something recently, and McKinsey were actually saying that banking particularly has been embraced, particularly through the sort of the COVID times, by sort of about 41% up. It's really been embraced. But in terms of the state of the financial services sector from your point of view, how do you think the financial services is really keeping up with that sort of customer expectations?
Wow, yeah. So I think if I maybe split apart the question into two parts. So firstly, like COVID. So obviously COVID has been massively impacting economies and industries across the world. I think Asia has been, if we look at the kind of global state of the world now, I think Asia's been one of the best responders. I think there's some kind of cultural elements where a lot of agencies have really kind of dealt with the COVID crisis early. And I think some of those behaviors have really, kind of translated into economies picking up quite quickly as well. I think China is a really obvious example. So yeah, I think COVID has impacted us. I think from a digital perspective, like a lot of trends that we're seeing, I think what COVID has done is actually accelerated trends that have already been there. So yes, obviously people can't go to branches in the same way that they used to, and they're needing to transfer that banking behavior into other experiences, obviously like mobile banking, like desktop banking, payment systems. So everything that they used to do and maybe sometimes rely on those offline experiences, obviously people were making that transition anyway. And, I think maybe in some countries, if you look at Asia as a whole, it's very hard to do because there's a lot of different personalities, a lot of different countries at different stages in their maturity across Asia. But definitely seeing COVID accelerate some of that mobilization of banking. And then in terms of keeping up with broader expectations, I think banking, finance is no different to any other industry. So if you think about obviously like travel and retail, these industries have gone through massive disruption. Finance has as well, maybe not to the same extent, because if you look at a lot of the big players in banking, a lot of the big players are still around. If you look at like travel with your Airbnb, for example, or retail with your Uber, Amazon, clearly, transport obviously with Uber and similar companies. I think there's still some disruption to come in our industry, but definitely there's been huge steps forward if you look at the last 5-10 years.
No, your focus, particularly at Citi, is more around the mobile apps, particularly. So if we could talk about that for a moment, have you seen anything different, particularly happening there? I mean, you and I, as you say, we've been around a while. How have you seen, maybe not necessarily in the last 6 months, but in terms of people's use of app usage change over, well, maybe even the last sort of 10 years, really?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, obviously 10 years is a long time in apps. If you think about, the iPhone was launched in 2007, so 13 years ago. So I think you've got two things at play there, Paul. Obviously you've got the hardware. So the hardware and the ecosystems, whether it's Apple or Android, there's been exponential development on those platforms. So you can do a lot more in terms of development. I think, from a banking lens, and like, to be fair, most commercial businesses, whether it is in transport or travel or retail, it's no longer a choice. So if you looked at 10 years ago, you know, an app was sometimes a bit of a vanity project for someone in marketing. Now it's, you know, it's a systemic part of the commercial platform. And for us, it's, you know, it's on the balance sheet in terms of, you know, what revenue we can generate through our mobile experiences, you know, what kind of customers can we convert to the mobile app, you know, at that new to bank phase. So it's pretty much, you know, if 10 years ago is obviously such a long time in our industry, but even 5 years ago, you know, the app was still the little sister to the desktop banking experience. And now it's the experience. And, you know, clearly we want to make it center to all of our mobile banking products and services. I think there's still a long way to go, not just our bank, but obviously across the industry. I don't think there's too many kind of super apps or, you know, like kind of Amazon or Google-like peers that we can refer to. I think some of the obvious ones you can look at would be like a WeChat in China, but obviously that's a very different proposition where they've kind of integrated a lot of different social, banking, kind of lifestyle experiences into one app.
Yeah, I mean,
so, you know, what Tencent have done has been really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, in APAC, that's particularly, or Asia particularly, that's more prevalent. So do you think the rest of the world is going to be playing catch up with Asia? Do you think Asia is kind of maybe ahead of the rest of the world in that respect?
That's a great question. So I think, you know, WeChat's not new. So, you know, Tencent and, you know, the QR code payment system and the way they somehow bundle kind of, you know, Facebook and a payment system and Tinder and a restaurant booking system, and they can package that all into one experience. You know, and anyone who's worked in kind of web design knows that, you know, the Chinese approach to web design is very different to the kind of Western design principles that we're familiar with. So it's really tough. That's a really tough question because equally, not many of these like big Chinese brands have really extrapolated their experience and their brand outside of that ecosystem, outside of the China market. I think the one obvious example you could probably point to would be probably ByteDance with TikTok, but for different political and commercial reasons, they haven't scaled out of China probably to the extent that they could have. So I think that's a great example of, obviously not so much in the finance sector, but definitely from a kind of social experience. They've kind of integrated, you know, it's almost like a Snapchat, a Spotify, a Facebook and an Instagram into one platform. So I think there is a bit of uniqueness with the China ecosystem and the customer expectation in China. I am a big believer in the kind of big platforms that the Western markets have as well. So I think what Amazon do across, you know, multi verticals now is very interesting, whether it's retail or entertainment. Obviously what Google are doing. So Google operate across, you know, with their video platform like YouTube, obviously their core search platform, their media platform. So I think there's some interesting brands that could be seen as similar. But yeah, China is still very, very different.
Yeah, I think, like you say, they're kind of ahead, and the proliferation of their platform into the rest of the world is probably more to do with political reasons rather than actually anything else. Mm-hmm. I just think that culturally, is there anything about Asia where they want it all in one place together, or actually would we want that from Google or Facebook, or are we people who like not to have our sort of all our eggs in one basket maybe, and we're happy with all these different things? We don't like one brand perhaps owning everything about us.
That's another great question. I think people will be moving away from making too many choices. I think this, you know, kind of the old marketing philosophy that, you know, give somebody something new and, you know, exciting, and, you know, give them that kind of pressure and that customer decision journey. I think people will want ease and efficiency, and I think with data, you know, brands and you know, platforms will know a lot more about customers' expectation and what they like, what they don't want, what's relevant to them at a specific stage in their life cycle. So to answer your question, I think there is absolutely room. I think, you know, if you look at the big platforms again, you know, obviously the big retail and technology platforms have, I guess, the strongest capability because their DNA is all about engineering and weaving these experiences together. If I just use one example with Amazon, I think they've also built up a legacy of trust, and that equity of trust that Amazon have built up. If you go to Amazon now, obviously you've got a Prime experience where you've got your video content being streamed by Amazon. You've got your retail and shopping experience delivered by Amazon. I think they can absolutely translate that into other verticals. Obviously, healthcare is an area they're diversifying into, and I think there's a huge opportunity for them to translate that trust into a financial brand. Because if you think about the barriers to entry, and the reason why big banks, whether it's JP Morgan, Bank of America, or Citibank, our point of differentiation is trust. We've been around for hundreds of years. We've built this legacy of trust and experience, but I think there's still an opportunity for a big player, and I think led by technology, because of the world we live in now, could potentially disrupt the industry further.
I think trust, as you say, trust is the key thing for everything now. I mean, particularly where your data is concerned. It's also, I wonder why, we're in a position now where things like progressive web apps have been around maybe for a while as well, and the sort of mobile versions of websites can be quite good. Yet the place for native apps is still quite strong. It's still growing. It's still what people want. We still have a number of apps. We've probably all got sort of a various banking app, particularly on our phone. And I think that's probably to do with that trust element. It might also be driven by the banks who prefer that sort of control and security as well.
Look, I think absolutely. I think native apps still have a place, and once again, you're talking about long-term trends. We've both been around long enough to know that along the pathway of technology and development, and what we know now as the digital industry, there was a lot of novelties, and there was a lot of things that came along the way that left very quickly. And I was reading something just recently around Flash, and I remember the Flash days where a lot of web development was done, and almost, I won't say overnight, but obviously there was a transition period, and then just because of security and the stability of that code, it almost disappeared overnight. And I think my point here is, Paul, that with native apps, I think people are still looking for some of those fundamental app experiences that native apps can deliver, and obviously that speed. So having the device, having the app local on the device brings an element of speed. There's offline capability in a lot of instances. I think that consistent look and feel. Obviously web development has come a long way with things like PWA, but I think brands knowing and trusting that on-device look and feel, I think plays a big factor. But there's also challenges as well. There's the complexity of building sometimes multi-platform experiences, whether it's desktop, PWA, and native. There's the expense that goes along with that, and obviously the team, investment, human and financial capital to sustain those experiences. So yeah, and I think that's all time consuming, and what obviously one of the critical elements of success in today's industry is speed. Because when updates happen, when products happen, if security patches are needed, you need to get them out there quickly.
So how do you? Because as you say, that for me, it's all about trust and convenience. Quite frankly, I think I often say people are basically lazy. If you put it in front of them, which is kind of what's happening in WeChat, really, they've now offered them a ability to buy something with having to go elsewhere, and then you can just pay for it while you're there, and it's just easy. It's just our inherent sort of nature, really, to want to take that sort of easiest path. So but developing, as you say, across these multiple apps and different devices is quite a sort of a difficult thing to be agile, in terms of infrastructure. So how do you cope with that? How do you address that? How do you prioritize? How do you keep up?
So I think you need to go. The one thing that I think, once again, talking about that legacy and that experience over time, is that apps are no longer that kind of novelty project in the side corner. So I think how you keep up is, app development has to be part of the commercial and strategy planning of any business. It needs to be resourced correctly. So making sure that you've got the right human and investment capital behind it for it to be a success. I think keeping up, like sustaining any footprint for your brand. So whether it is your retail experience, whether it's your website, whether it's your app, I think there has to be a return for that experience. So as long as you can prove to the business that, you know, you're ultimately working towards lifetime customer value, you're converting sales, so of existing customers, you're driving, you know, acquisition of new customers. So I think it's about like proving the value of those platforms. And then honestly, that's when the, you know, the resource and the support will happen internally. And, you know, it's just part of your footprint and your legacy for your brand.
Yeah, I mean, as per the nature of this talk, really, is about sort of the customer expectation is there, though, is it? So you're saying now, really, it's not a vanity project. It's something that is really, you know, you can't not have this convenience, if you like. Really, it's a barrier to entry. It's hygiene, really, for a bank.
Well, exactly. And it's not just banking, but the reality is that businesses that are born now, they're not talking about like, you know, building an app. Like the business is the app. So I think, you know, the challenge that all of us, you know, meaning brands that weren't built and born in that digital era, there is an element of transferring experience. And, you know, if you look at the kind of Asia, even Asia, which is quite an advanced region overall, you're still looking at about 40, maybe 45% of, you know, banking customers across the industry kind of logging into their mobile experience every month. So you can still see there's a huge, like 60% opportunity to bridge there. So I think we're just getting started in many ways, Paul. And, you know, fintechs, obviously, you know, these are banking organizations that are born digital, but their customer bases are small. Like you're talking about, you know, hundreds of thousands in some cases versus, you know, big, you know, global banks who you're talking, you know, double-digit million customer bases. So I think there's still a big element of, you know, big companies that weren't built digital, so weren't born digitally, transferring their existing customer base into these experiences.
I mean, obviously, banking is a sector in its own right, but of course, every industry requires finance and money, and so banking really is the glue that holds every bit of business together, really. So how do you think the banking industry is doing? How good a job do you think it's doing at becoming part of a digital ecosystem that exists? How it's sort of collaborating with third parties and different payment systems and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I think there's different brands that are doing great things in different spaces. So obviously there's been a lot of leaders in the kind of payment space that you hear a lot about. Another really interesting and growing area at the moment is micro lending. So if you've heard of brands like Klarna or Afterpay, I think they're doing a really great experience of like being there at that moment that's important for the client or for the customer. And what I mean by that is that if you're out shopping and, you know, brands like Afterpay, which have really done well in Australia, you know, whether it's an offline retail experience or whether it's an online retail experience, they're at that moment of truth for the customer. And it's a really easy, frictionless conversion experience. And it means for many people who either can't afford the product or equally just want to spread the cost of the product over time, it's real, you know, there's no application. It's a really straightforward, frictionless experience. And I think there's some great experiences like that, but I still think there's a long way to go. I think big banks and big experiences are going to be driven by data. I think we've got a wealth of data, and obviously the way that we use that profile and information, we have to do it, you know, respectfully and responsibly. But at the same time, I think customers, whether it's our customers or across the industry, they do expect personal experiences. They don't want to be broadcasted to. They don't want products pushed at them that have no relevancy or potentially not applicable to them. So I think that kind of micro targeting or hyper targeting of customers, both on platform, off platform, understanding where they are across their journey. You know, and if you think about the marketing space, understand lookalike opportunities to grow your acquisition pools. I think a lot of it is kind of underpinned by, I think, not just having the data, which I think a lot of industries, whether it's banking or other tech-driven industries, I think the data is there. It's about how you effectively use it now. How do you do?
Yeah, I think that's my point. Is by integrating with all the different bits of data, then if the trust is there as well, then the opportunity for that sort of you know, tap and go experiences or zero click experiences where you know it's almost seamless. You can just sort of walk in and take stuff, and they know that you've taken it, so therefore you can be charged, or you're being sort of invoiced for stuff that that you just order and it just arrives. But for that to work, there needs to be collaboration, doesn't there, between the banks and all those third parties?
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of people. I think it's easy to get lost in the technology as well, Paul. And if you ask me what the best payment experience is, I'll probably still say it's Uber, because I walk in, I have the experience and I obviously partake in their product, which is a personal driver. I get in at location A, I get dropped off at location B, and the payment experience is seamless. It's been charged to my card, which has been previously set up. So I think to your point before, zero click, which is obviously the Amazon Go proposition, getting in and out of an Uber, which is their proposition. I think it is all about frictionless. People, they want that. There has to be obviously a kind of background of authentication and making sure that data is secured and privacy is respected. But clients just want friction taken away. They want to have the experiences and not the friction.
So I'm conscious of time. It's been great, this, but what would you say are the sort of key things you talked there about? Really now a brand needs to sort of allow for this multi-device. They need to resource up. They need to understand that to create that, to meet that customer expectation, this is apps and all the different devices are really kind of the barrier to entry. But in terms of you talking to your peers, and what would be your recommendations in terms of if you're looking ahead for the next 5 years, what should you be preparing for?
Well, okay. So I think kind of carrying on from the last conversation, I think I won't go into like frictionless experiences, because I think that's like the point of entry now. Everyone wants to make sure that their brand experience, whether it is acquiring new customers or once you're a loyal customer, making sure that once you've got them in within your ecosystem, to make that experience as smooth as possible. I think that is definitely a point of entry. I think the really fascinating trend in our industry, Paul, is going to be the transfer of wealth. I think, this born digital generation, their expectations are very different. If you think about our generation, definitely the generation before us, the concept of banking and having a personal banker or a broker and, that kind of human touch, that is being replaced by, robo-advisory and artificial intelligence. So I think that, the next 5 to 10 years is going to be fascinating. We talked about the importance of trust, but I think, how do brands add that kind of layer of value on top of what, a lot of machine learning and artificial intelligence can deliver what humans used to do. So I think trying to find that kind of value point of difference, I think is going to be really critical for brands. I can't, if you think about risk, whether it's in banking or technology or retail, I think data and the way that we manage data and do it in a respectful way, responsibly, aligned to all of the global standards, I think that will only increase, and making sure, and I think that will also be a point of difference that we can link back to trust as well, because with these personalized experiences that are driven by data, the customer equally has to have faith that you're managing their data in a responsible way, and obviously in a way that keeps their identity secure and private. And nowhere is that more important, I think, other than potentially the health industry, than it is in banking. So
yeah, well, it always strikes me that money particularly is it's not something you can feel and touch necessarily. So therefore, the experience now is everything, isn't it? Really, if you're engaging with your bank, it's just numbers moving around whichever bank you're with. So actually, experience is everything, and that's why what I found fascinating about some of the challenger banks coming in with their apps is actually sometimes the little things and even the gimmicks that it goes ching when you get paid and things like that. People like that, and I think some of the bigger guys are not recognizing that, or maybe are starting to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of those examples, with the new generation, once again, as long as it's done responsibly, I think there's some examples in the US where you can take that gamification element of banking probably to maybe the more dangerous end of the spectrum. But I think if you do it responsibly, in a way that is in the interest of the customer and aligned to all of our, global governance and compliance, I think there's a generational change happening in our industry.
I was just looking down my notes. You mentioned AI briefly there, but do you think, how do you expect AI to really kind of, I mean, it's being embraced in everything we do now, really, but how do you think AI will be used in maybe your sector more to add value to that customer experience? Is it just around the personalization, or do you think there's other areas where the banking systems need to be using it?
Oh, well, I'm sure there's vast areas in terms of, like, security and governance and monitoring and reducing things like money laundering. So I think the possibilities are like almost limitless. And I think from a customer experience perspective, for me personally, I find it really exciting, the opportunity to really have this kind of always on, almost like learning machine in the background, without having to have that human intervention. The manual planning and development could sometimes be replaced and will be replaced in future by algorithms that can do this more efficiently. And then, as I said before, the humans can focus on the kind of strategy, the creative, the design. And what's really exciting is how that creative and design and data experience kind of come together. I find that exciting. I think it's going to be a key part of our industry and many other industries.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've been doing this a long while, but it still feels like there's so much further to go, so much more to do. Thankfully.
Yep.
Thankfully.
Correct.
Okay, James, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you very much for giving up your time. I think it's some great points you've made there, and for you out there listening to us, I hope you've enjoyed that too and learned got a lot. So thank you very much, James. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Paul. Cheers.